Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol character spotlight. Today, we are taking a look at Mr. Blade, the Midnight Suns affiliation leader, and I figure kind of a fitting way to end off the month of October. Obviously, being the month of Halloween, we're going to end with the leader who goes bump in the night. So yeah, I mean, we've kind of geared towards the Midnight Suns a little bit during these throughout the last month. I think we had, at the very least, we had Ghost Rider because he would have been last week by the time this video goes up. I'm actually recording this in advance of that, so time is a weird illusion and nothing makes sense. But anyways, as per usual, we're going to go ahead, we're going to take a look at Blade, all of the things that he does and kind of talk about what places and other models might benefit him, obviously outside of his own affiliation, and we'll also talk about him there. Kind of tactics cards, things like that you might want to bring with him. Again, we're going to pay some consideration to the ones that come with his affiliation because obviously he is kind of intended to be run there since he's their only leader. So, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about his new update. I unfortunately haven't been able to put him on the table all that much since the update. By the time this video goes out, I think, and now I could be wrong about this, but I think it's possible the battle report will already have went up, and if so, that's like going to be my second time putting him on the table since his update, so I really haven't had much of a chance to play around with it, but thankfully his update was relatively simple and it shouldn't be too hard to kind of talk about how that's going to work and what that might change for his gameplay. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start breaking down his stats here. So first things first, Blade is a 4 threat. He's coming in with a solid defensive line of 4-3-4. That's kind of like what you want to see. Two fours and a three is, I'd say, roughly average for 4 threats. He's looking at 6 health, and I believe he is identical on both sides. Yes, he is. And he's going to be a size 2 with a medium move, so nothing too crazy there, although notably energy is his weakest side, which turns out energy is one of the stronger attack types in the game right now, so that's not amazing for him. But then we're going to go into his attacks, and starting out, he actually has a really powerful builder attack. It's a 5 dice range to Mystic, builder, so he's going to gain power equal to the damage that he deals. He's got bleed automatically, which is handy. I mean, bleed is generally considered kind of one of the lesser conditions until it isn't. So, not needing condition for it or like any triggers for it is nice, but it is just bleed, and we'll see what ways he synergizes with that later. But um, yeah, so that's always good though, handing out free conditions, and then it does have a wild pierce as well, and I mean pierce on a builder that's already mystic, so it's already a side that's kind of the good side to be hitting on for a lot of models. Yeah, I mean it's a very solid builder. There's not much to say about it. It's handing out a free condition on top of being a 5 dice mystic pierce, and that's a really strong builder. There's not much to say about it. Next, when he needs to either be really consistent with the power generation or play from a little bit more of a range, he has the Throwing Glaives attack. This is going to be a range 4 dice gainer, so it's going to gain him 1 power regardless of the result of the roll. So, if he's sitting on a back point or if he's just kind of needing to, he needs exactly 1 more power and doesn't want to risk messing up the katana, very consistent for that sort of thing. It's also physical, notably, so if something has a really good mystic defense but a low physical defense, as things with good mystic defense tend to have, this might even just be your preferred attack for those situations. Now, it does have a couple triggers on it. It's also handing out bleeds, but this time it's requiring a wild, so not quite as consistent, especially on a 4 dice there. I don't know the exact percentage off the top of my head, but I think it's like 40 or sub 40. So not super great for that. I mean, if you're throwing 2 of them, your odds are pretty decent, but with one, could be a lot better for consistency. And then he also has a hit trigger pursuit. Now this is his change. This is what was recently added. So before damage is dealt, he may advance towards the target character small if he got that hit, which is really nice for Blade because one of the problems he had before, and we'll talk about this a little bit, is that he doesn't really have much in the way of early game mobility. Well, you know, he's still trying to get into the fray. He's kind of a lot of the times just having to move and then attack. So it's nice for him to be able to do that from range 4, get the pursuit trigger, and then hopefully come in with a katana, or maybe you already had 3 power, so now you got your spender online. Speaking of which, we're going to talk about a spender next. Knight of the Dampier. Now this is going to be another mystic attack, so he's not quite getting all 3, but still some variety is better than none. It's going to cost you 4 power, it's range 3, and it's throwing out 7 dice, so 7 dice on the mystic side, already nothing to scoff at. If the target character has the bleed condition, he can reroll any number of his attack dice. So this is now a 7 dice with full rerolls, which is crazy good. Now, if they weren't already bleeding and you use this anyways just because you wanted the extra dice, it's also going to make them bleed. No conditions there, so that's handy. I mean, we'll see again later in a second that Blade really does appreciate having some bleeding foes around him. And after the attack is resolved, he may advance medium. So all in all, this spender is amazing. It's got full rerolls on 7 dice on a attack type that, as mentioned with the katana, is generally pretty good, except for the models that it's not. It's handing out a free condition if they don't already have it, and it's giving him a medium advance afterwards, which, as we just said, movement is kind of this guy's biggest problem. So, I mean, once he gets rolling, if he can start spurring these out, he's going to be doing pretty well. He's going to be dishing out a lot of damage at least. We're going to skip over the leadership for now. We'll come back to it, but let's talk about the rest of the things that Blade does himself. He has Half-Blood Physiology as his first superpower. This is an active superpower. It's going to cost him 1 power, and he's going to immediately perform a shake action. This is just really good. I mean, this ability I think is only on 2 models in the game right now, Blade and Agent Venom. I can't think of any others off the top of my head. But being able to deny something like a stagger or even, a shock or incinerate or something like that, super useful. Stun even, like this is just amazing. Being able to get rid of conditions for a single power is such a good ability, and really can't be overstated how useful that can be in the right situation. Obviously, there are some teams where it's much less useful. Teams that don't really want to throw out any sort of conditions or anything like that, it's not going to come up. But if you're playing against a condition focused team, or even just a couple characters that have some nasty ones, it's really nice to have abilities like this. So he definitely appreciates it. Oh, I can English. Um, and yeah, I think it's a very solid thing for him to have. Next, he has his defensive tech here. It's a reactive ability called Supernatural Senses. This is going to cost him 2 power while he is defending against a physical or mystic attack. During the modified dice step of the attack, he may use the superpower. He's going to reroll any number of his defense dice, including skulls. So that's really good. Now suddenly your 4 dice physical and 4 dice mystic, which were already solid. I mean, 4 dice is good. Now they're full rerolls, including skulls. That's really powerful. Now, of course, the glaring flaw here is that once again, he is weak on the energy side, and he's not allowed to use this for energy attacks. So his energy defense is 3 dice, no modifying in any way from him, at least if he has, other things can still buff it. But that's kind of his glaring flaw here, is that he is very squishy on the energy side. So if you're running him into something, like Guardians of the Galaxy or something like that, where they have a lot of these far range energy attacks, they're gonna kind of do some rude things to Mr. Blade here. But if you're running him into a primarily physical or mystic team, he can do a lot of work as long as you keep him away from any energy attacks they do have. He's going to be quite bulky, and he's going to dish out a lot of damage. Next, he has Vampiric Immortality. This is a passive of his, and it says at the end of his activation, he's going to gain 1 power and remove 1 damage from himself for each other character within range 2 that has the bleed condition. And this is where his kit kind of starts to come together. So basically, for all of the enemies and any allies, if your opponent's been throwing out bleeds, within 2 of him that are bleeding, he's going to be able to heal and gain power off of those at the end of his turn. So he's really good for being able to kind of throw himself into the middle of a scrum. He's going to hand out all these bleed tokens. He's going to hand out all these really powerful mystic attacks. And then when, with his defensive tech, he's hopefully going to be able to kind of survive a hit or two. You don't want to let their entire team punch him, but hopefully he can survive a hit or two, and then when he wakes back up, next round or whatever, when you go to activate him again, he's going to heal up a bunch and he's going to gain a bunch of power at the end of his turn. So, or I guess he's already gained some of the power because that was when he ran in and started handing out the bleeds. So yeah, he's got a really cool ability in that sense, and it's really important to note if you're a newer player and haven't run into this interaction yet. Specifically, Blade is one of the few models in the game that cares about this, but technically, special conditions are still on the model until the either cleanup or power phase. Either way, in this case, I want to say it's cleanup where they go away. So if you daze a model, but you gave them the bleed condition before you dazed them, notably, you can't give the condition after they've been dazed. So here where it says the katana is after the attack is resolved, you would have to have hit them with something to give them bleed before that, because if the katana was the attack that actually took them down, you wouldn't be able to give them the condition anymore because they're already dazed. But if they had bleed before they were dazed and now they're dazed, um, Blade is still going to be able to heal and gain power off of them as long as they're within two, because they technically still have the bleed condition until their card actually flips over in, I want to say that's the cleanup phase that happens. So that's really, really important to note, and Blade is one of the only models in the game that cares about that. So it's one of those few times where a lot of the times when you're playing and a model gets dazed, your opponent will be like, yeah, I'm just gonna get rid of the conditions now because it's convenient. Blade is one of those models where you want to say like, okay, wait a second on that one. We just need to remember that they're there for this dude. Really important small rules thing that catches a lot of people off. So just making that as clear as possible for anyone potentially newer to the game or just hasn't run into that interaction yet. But yeah, so that is Blade. Like I said, there is no change on the flip side except his art becomes a lot more aggressive and kind of swoopy. So yeah, Blade is a lot of fun. He's got a really, really powerful kit in some ways. He's got crazy, crazy good dice with full rerolls. Um, Bleeds for days, which again, it's a condition that feels relatively minor until it isn't. If your model's on one health and they're bleeding, that's basically a stagger in some cases. So can be really, really powerful. He kind of synergizes with his own kit very well, but also has a natural synergy with any other characters handing out blade, yeah, bleed. So he's kind of setting up a lot. And then, of course, the last thing worth talking about here is Bump in the Night, which is his leadership ability for the Midnight Suns. So what Bump in the Night says is once per turn at any time during an allied character's activation, it may spend one power. If it does, place that character within one of its current position. So that's really, really nice on any model that kind of just feels like they need a little bit more mobility to get where they want to go. Um, Blade is actually kind of a prime example of that. He really, really appreciates having a little bit of extra mobility here and there. Before his buff, it wasn't really enough. The bump was never, or I shouldn't say never, but very rarely was the bump the difference between him getting to attack twice or attack once. Now that he has the pursuit on the throwing glaives, it kind of adds that interesting thing of, okay, well, it is only a small advance on the pursuit, but it's also a gainer. So maybe you're even starting the round out with zero power. Well, you can do a throwing glaive, hopefully get that pursuit trigger, and it is only a hit, so it's not super, super unlikely that you're gonna get it. I think it's something like a 75% chance even. So hopefully you get that hit trigger, and then that power you just gained you can use to bump to get yourself closer for a katana or something if that short move wasn't quite enough. So there's a lot of play around with that. Specifically things like B maps. I haven't done the measurements to see, but like I think that's going to be really good now for being able to move from your back point to your opponent's point sort of thing. I haven't actually measured that to see exactly whether that works, or I don't think the short does it by itself. So I think maybe the short and the bump does, hard to say. But either way, it's gonna at least help him close the gap a little bit. Um, as a leadership ability, it's really, really powerful. There's a lot of characters in it, the affiliation, that really appreciate it, and a handful of characters from out of the affiliation that make great use of it as well. One of the big things to note with any sort of placement ability like this is the larger base size that you have, the more you're going to benefit from it. So, of course, Blade is coming in on a small base, so this doesn't really apply to him as well. But in terms of what sort of models he likes to run in his affiliation, typically large base models get a lot of benefit out of this ability. Before Immortal Hulk was a thing, a lot of people did enjoy splashing Hulk in Midnight Suns for that reason of, he's already got the Gamma Leap, which is already amazing. So now you're going to also add a bump in the night to that, and he's going to be just flying across the board. Well, it turns out that's the same with the Immortal Hulk now, who's obviously a Midnight Sun affiliated character. So Immortal Hulk is very capable of doing a bump in the night and gamma leaping. If it's the first turn, you got to do something to help him with the power in that. But any turn after the first, as long as you have 4 power, he can do that, and he does tend to generate power pretty well. So he's gonna fly across the board. Ghost Rider's another model who doesn't need the leadership necessarily. He has his own long move. Obviously, we talked about him last week at this point, but he doesn't mind having that bump. It can kind of give him an extra little bit of positioning. We talked about his synergy in Midnight Sun, so we're not going to talk about that too much. But yeah, just in general, large bases really appreciate this. Models that are generally kind of, they need that little push to help them get into range of things. Also really, really appreciate this leadership. It's one of the reasons why Voodoo's actually really good with this, is Voodoo's sitting on a medium base with range 3 attacks primarily. So Voodoo can kind of use the bump to help himself get around and get into range on things, because he does have pretty solid range, and the big base size helps him get a lot of value out of it. So yeah, in general, I think those are kind of the models that like to be running under that leadership. And turns out all the ones I just listed are affiliated, but obviously there's some great splashes there as well. And I definitely encourage playing around with characters that kind of feel like they need a little bit of extra mobility. Try them out in Midnight Suns and see if maybe it does it for them. Um, it can be used really interestingly defensively as well. Things like, moving yourself barely in range, making your attack, and then bumping out. Or if you have your own movement ability, obviously using your own movement ability, hitting them twice, and then bumping the knight away so they can't hit you back as easily. Stuff like that can be really cool. And there's a lot of ways you can use this leadership, so I'm not going to spend too much time going into all of them, but it is a super versatile, powerful leadership. So yeah, I definitely encourage playing around with it. In terms of back to focusing kind of on Blade himself, he's also available in the Avengers and Defenders. So let's talk real quick about those affiliations and what he does with them. So first we'll talk about Avengers, and I mean we'll just kind of go through the list. So original Steve Rogers, giving a power reduction is nice for his defensive tech, but not really anything too special. I mean, he's not going to be using this all the time, especially since a lot of the time your opponent's going to be targeting him with kind of energy focused attacks. That said, Steve 1 is a bodyguard, so Steve 1 could kind of take those energy attacks for him if they happen to be kind of floating around the same area. So I don't hate him there. I don't think he's necessarily an awful choice. However, I do think it's not really anything he's getting a crazy amount of value out of. So I don't really think Steve 1 is the best place for him, but he's definitely not bad. He's still a very solid heavy hitter when he needs to be, so he's okay there. Into Sam, unfortunately, being a 4 threat kind of puts him a little bit above what Sam typically likes to bring, and he doesn't really fill any specific tech piece that Sam's kind of missing. So again, I think it's one of those situations where he's not actively bad there or anything like that. Like, he's still a fairly solid damage dealer. He's still relatively bulky, which is something that Sam likes. Again, avoiding those energy attacks being really crucial to that. But he's not really his favorite in any way. Yeah, I think it's kind of a neutral choice for Sam to take Blade. Obviously, he's affiliated, so that's great, and being an Avengers gives him access to Avengers Assemble, which is also fantastic for him. Um, Again, just little bits of mobility here and there that he's definitely going to be missing outside of Midnight Suns. So next we have the new Steve, and new Steve I actually think out of all the Avengers leaders is probably the best one for him. I don't think it's anything too crazy, but having a builder with a wild Pierce kind of means you can get a 2-for-1 on that leadership. Obviously, for those unfamiliar, the new Steve's leadership is if you have a hit in the attack roll, you can pay 1 power to turn one of your other dice into something else of your choosing. So you pay 1 power, you turn a die into a wild. So now you also have a Pierce and you have another success, and you're doing this on a builder, so you're going to end up gaining 2 power for that. So really, really good for that, or just pushing a little bit of extra damage here or there when you need to. Even stuff like getting the bleed on the throwing glaives, maybe you did the throwing glaive because you wanted to build the 1 power for Knight of the Dampier. Well, now you can, I mean, I guess if you're spending the power, that kind of defeats the purpose. But maybe you're at range 3, so you can't do the katana. So you do the throwing glaives, you want to get that bleed out so you can do the Knight of the Dampier with the full rerolls and that sort of situation. Relatively niche. Again, I don't think Avengers is necessarily his favorite home, but I don't think he's a bad pick, and I do think New Steve is at least interesting for him. So that's a solid one that's worth considering. Next for affiliations, he's also a defender. And going into Defenders, we have two leaders there, obviously. We have Doctor Strange and Daredevil now. And yeah, so for Doctor Strange, his leadership, it's allowing you to basically change your attack types to physical, energy, or mystic. You're choosing by spending 1 power, and then if you deal damage, you're going to throw out the Hex condition. So, I mean, if you're building towards a bit of a condition team with Blade, I think that could be really interesting, like a Blade, Doctor Strange, and then, a handful of other characters throwing out conditions, maybe trying stuff like a Mega Red or Strucker or something like that. Trying to throw out a bunch of conditions. It could be interesting because he already hits on two different sides with the physical and the mystic. I don't think it's necessarily an amazing leadership for him, but it's solid. I don't dislike it at all. The only other catch there, obviously, being if you're planning on running both of them, that's already 9 threat from 2 models, but that's kind of just going to be something that's happening if you're running Doctor Strange in general. And lastly, for defenders, we have the new Daredevil leadership, which is once per turn you can reroll a number of your attack dice equal to the number of enemy characters within 2 of yourself. This, in my opinion, out of all the leaderships that aren't his own and, the places he's affiliated, and it's sending me all the way back. I was hoping it was going to keep me there. Um, but in terms of the places he's affiliated, I think New Daredevil is probably his favorite leadership. I mean, the we've all seen at this point models like Logan who have a 5 dice Pierce builder with 2 rerolls and how effective those can be. So now looking at Blade with something like that, and we're making it Mystic, it's auto applying bleed. That's really, really powerful. I mean, a 5 dice builder with Pierce with 2 rerolls on the Mystic side should very consistently do a good amount of damage. I think Daredevil's leadership gives Blade the potential to hit like a truck because of things like Pursuit or the movement off of Knight of the Dampier. He's going to be very capable of kind of getting into good positions where he can abuse that a little bit more. And yeah, I think that leadership's going to be fantastic with him. I haven't really had a chance to try it out myself yet, but I actually think there's a lot of room for kind of a Midnight Suns Defenders dual affiliation roster right now. So I think that's something that's really interesting and hopefully really good. But like I said, I haven't actually had a chance to try that out myself, so can't speak too much to it. So next we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna talk about some tactics cards for Mr. Blade here. And I mean, we'll start with the Midnight Suns ones. Now, unfortunately, I don't think, yeah, I'm gonna have to actually go to the database thingy so I can actually look for tactics cards. So let's go ahead and grab those here. First of all, we'll talk about the Midnight Suns ones. So Midnight Suns has a handful of tactics cards here. Banishment we'll talk about first. It's an interesting card. So basically, after an attack made by a Midnight Suns character is resolved, If the attack roll has a crit, a wild, and a hit, you can spend 2 to play this card. The target and enemies within 2 gain stun. On paper, this seems like a pretty decent card, but unfortunately, the condition to get it off is kind of one of those things where you're never going to get it when you want to get it, and it's going to show up when you're making like a single attack against a character you don't really care all that much about. So it's a bit of an awkward card. I don't think it does anything particularly for Blade. Going into bats, the Ghost Hound. This card is seeing a lot of rising stocks lately in Midnight Suns just because of models like Immortal Hulk making a lot of use out of it. Basically, it says you can spend 2 power when you're modifying your attack or defense dice, and you can change one of your dice to any result, including skulls. This can be a great card for, that, oh, I'm about to go down and I'm perfectly dying, so I could survive on 1 by playing this, or you want to get that little extra bit of damage out because they're going to survive on 1 if you don't. So it's got situations where it's very, very good for stuff like that. I don't think it's necessarily anything more special with Blade than it would be with pretty much any other model. I mean, being able to push through the Pierce, I guess, kind of helps with that a little bit, or even push through the Pursuit if you really, really need it. But in general, if you're kind of that desperate for the movement part of the Pursuit, you probably should have just done a move action. So yeah, nothing too much for that one. The last one, however, I do really, really like with him, Siege of Darkness. Any number of allied Midnight Suns may pay 2 power to play this card. Each one that spent power may immediately perform an attack with a power cost of 0. So this one's really, really interesting with Blade specifically. And we'll go ahead and go back to the characters so we can bring up Blade's card again here, because Blade has a little bit more options than a lot of other models do for that attack, because he can do either the throwing glaive or the katana. And notably with the tactics card is it doesn't have to be played during a character's activation, so you can play that before deciding which character is going to go. So if you're not sure if you're ready to go with Blade, maybe you don't want to waste a move action and you don't really want to risk the throwing glaive failing to get the pursuit, you could use what's it called? Then we literally just had the card pulled up. You could use that card, Siege of Darkness, to see if you're going to get the pursuit. Also, of course, throw some chip damage in and refund yourself 1 of the power. But see if you get that pursuit, and then if you do, great, it's go time. You go with Blade. If not, well, maybe somebody else will go now. So it gives you a little bit of versatility on that. On the flip side, if Blade's already kind of in the fray, another katana is never a bad idea. I mean, that's still a 5 dice wild pierce mystic. That's a fantastic attack. So getting extras of those definitely going to be worth the 2 power most of the time. And because it's a builder, a lot of the times on an attack like that, you have pretty good odds to build back what you're spending on it. So, if you're able to make that attack into a character who's not super bulky on the mystic side, um, there's almost no reason not to most of the time. So yeah, just really solid card for him. Going into things like restricted cards, I don't think there's anything he needs too much. I mean, he doesn't hate Brace for Impact because he doesn't have anything particularly good against throws. His reroll thing doesn't work against it, so it is just 4 dice, but it is still 4 dice. It's not, a 3 or even a 2 or anything like that. So he has solid defense against throws, but Brace is just a generically good card and can help keep him alive for that vampiric immortality to really get some value back. So solid card for him there. I don't particularly love him for patch up or anything like that. I mean, if he happens to be surviving on 1, he is a great target for it because he does have some solid defensive tech. But only having 6 health means a lot of the times you might not really be able to get full value out of it, or he's just going to die before you do. Plus, he kind of already has his own healing baked in, so you don't need the extra healing from stuff like that. Um, on the other hand, Sacrifice I actually think is a very solid card with him. I kind of mentioned this when I mentioned him in Avengers, but the 3 energy defense is a huge sore spot for Blade, so being able to kind of pass off a hard hitting energy attack, even if it's just once within the game, can be very, very solid for that sort of thing. So Yeah, I think as far as restricted cards go, those are kind of his preferred ones. So the last thing we're going to talk about, and I don't want to spend too much time because we're already hitting that 30-minute mark, and I tend to not want these videos to go too much longer than that, is what kind of characters you might want to bring him in. And I mean, some of the synergies for him are kind of obvious. Anyone who's handing out bleed conditions is a solid choice for him. I also don't hate him on kind of condition focused teams, trying him under something like Strucker's Hydra, where it's all about throwing out a bunch of conditions. That can be really, really interesting with him, stack on his healing a little bit as well. Also, passive rerolls and stuff like that. We did talk about how valuable rerolls can be for a model like that when we were talking about Daredevil, so I don't hate him there. Similar vein, Zemo's a solid model with him. He's throwing out bleed conditions, passive rerolls, the same sort of deal there. So I mean, right out the gate, we're getting a couple of interesting options here. One option that I quite like with him is actually Hood. So Hood has, is it? Yeah, it is on this side. When Hood's not in his possessed form, he has this black arts ability. So he's going to pick an allied character within 3 of himself. They're going to remove up to 3 damage, and they're going to gain the bleed condition. So it's kind of supposed to be a bit of a double-edged sword. You're going to heal your model, but they're going to bleed. So, over time, in theory, they'll take that damage that you've healed back and then more. What's really interesting with this is with Blade's healing, that can that can heal off of bleeding allies as well. So what you can do with this is you can throw the heal up some of your allies for 3 health, give them the bleed condition, and then Blade is going to heal more from them when his turn comes around. So obviously it's still a downside for the models that you're throwing the bleed condition on, but you're also healing 3 wounds, and how often does a model go, more than 3 rounds before it gets dazed in MCP? So yeah, in general, I think that's a really cool synergy for him. There is throwing bleeds onto your own guys kind of gives you a little bit of interesting agency with that. And yeah, how do you flip these guys? I don't know how you actually. Oh, here it is. Normal and possessed. I just wanted to see. Yeah, the possessed one also does hand out a bleed, so you have even more of that synergy going when he's on that side as well. You're handing out bleeds to the enemies, so can be really really useful in that regard. Another specific synergy I want to talk about with him is actually Drax, who's a model that doesn't really get talked about all that much, but I recently built mine up and I kind of realized, like, hey, this is actually kind of a cool synergy that these guys might have. So I figured I'd talk about it here. And if anyone's tried it, please let me know how it goes, because I actually think it's a really cool idea, and I might try playing around with it at some point in the near future. But basically, Drax on his Blades attack, it's just a basic 5 dice builder, but it has a wild bleed, so again, immediately there, but also has, if the target character has the bleed condition already, you may reroll 2 attack dice during this attack. So suddenly, again, we talked about 5 dice builders with 2 dice rerolls being really, really good. Obviously, this one doesn't have a pierce, but still, that's really, really solid. And if anyone's handing out bleeds on your team, it's gonna be Blade. So yeah, I think there's a really cool synergy there, and I'd be curious to try them together. And I also think Drax really appreciates the bump in the night leadership. So yeah, in general, I actually just think Drax might be a really good Midnight Sun for some reason. But I haven't tried that out myself, so I can't really speak to it too much. Yeah, across the board, I can't think of any other crazy good things. He doesn't mind at all characters who can either help him defensively or take hits for him on the energy side specifically. So characters who will add some dice to his defense. He definitely doesn't mind characters like that. We already kind of talked about him with Doctor Strange 1, but we didn't mention that part of him, so that's relevant there. Um, in addition, characters, I completely lost my point. Um, characters who can hand out bleed, obviously, we've already talked about to death. Um, another thing that Blade quite enjoys actually is characters that can kind of help him move around the table a little bit more. Or, cards or affiliations that help with that too. Although I don't think there's a crazy amount of those that aren't affiliation specific. Obviously, we already mentioned Avengers Assemble, but characters that can push him around. I mean, Even stuff like Lockjaw, for example, who's already kind of being run in Midnight Suns by some people for the eye dog list, which is basically just teleporting Immortal Hulk up the board. Turns out the teleport ability is also fantastic for a model like Blade. Being able to throw that model into the fray so he gets to attack more with that katana is really, really powerful. Giving him extra dice for it, even more so. So, I mean, yeah, that's quite solid. Lockjaw's just a really good boy, and he's kind of good everywhere. But another model that throws out bleed as well. It's kind of crazy how many characters there are in the game that just happen to throw out bleed and also have good synergy with him. There is a lot of them. So I mean, even Black Cat, obviously. Oh no, she doesn't have a bleed. Oh yeah, she does have a bleed. It's an auto bleed. She has an auto bleed on her builder, and yeah, I mean, she's already a Midnight Sun, so she's great for that regard as well. There's tons of them. There's tons of models that get small benefits like that, and um, yeah, I think the ones where you're really going to get the most are ones that kind of help on two fronts, where it's things like Drax, where they're going to help each other. Things like Zemo, who's going to be giving the rerolls and the handing out bleeds of his own. Strucker, similar boat. Lockjaw, there we just talked about. Those are kind of be the big ones. Large bases, as we said, are generally pretty solid under the Midnight Suns leadership as well. So if you are running them in Midnight Suns, that's going to be something that's appreciated by Mr. Blade. But yeah, no, there's a lot, and I could probably spend all day going through all of the different characters that help him in some way, shape, or form. Hela, another perfect example of a recently updated character. If the target character is already bleeding, they're not going to be counting wilds as successes when they defend against her spender here. So really, really powerful in that regard. Yeah, and again, also handing out her own bleeds, but kind of one of the biggest problems that she has right now with that ability on her spender is that her bleed is on a wild, so it's not crazy consistent. So being able to kind of have Blade hand some out for her, if she's having trouble with it, and then she's getting all these benefits for it, it's just really, really good for stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of models, and I'm not gonna be able to go through all of them. So I think that is probably a good place to cut that. And that's also going to be the video. We've talked about kind of everything for them. As far as crises are concerned, because I always kind of tend to skip over those. Um, I don't think Blade has a super strong preference for which crises he's playing on. I mean, there are some that are worse for him than others. I actually don't mind him at all on things like Scoundrels. I don't think the cover is super detrimental to him because he is fairly mobile now, and he wants to be up close and personal anyways, so that's not too bad. He doesn't mind the extra power from stuff like Infinity Formula, and I'm pretty sure he rotates between Bs relatively well now, so that's quite solid for him. He doesn't hate the EMAPs, although they might be a little too congested for him. I think in general his team kind of likes them though, if you're playing him in Midnight Suns, so it's kind of a weird, like, he's not going to be absolutely in love with being able to take this many hits, but on the other hand, the rest of his team's going to like it. They've got other models that are probably going to be more of a priority for your opponent to punch than him. And with all of your opponent's models clumped up as well, he's going to really benefit from being able to leech off of all of these bleeding models. So there's a lot of advantages to those types of maps just as much as there are disadvantages. I don't think he loves Ds quite as much as some other models do. D maps are a little bit too spread out probably for him. He's not going to be able to benefit as often from the bleed bonuses, and he doesn't quite have the mobility to move between the points very well. So I don't think those are necessarily his favorite. But again, I don't think there's anything that's really actively bad for him. He hates being repositioned out of his own choosing. So stuff like scrolls, you have to be relatively careful. Spider infected. Trying to think of what other ones do that. Scrolls, spider infected, to some degree sword based, but I do think he rotates the G's really, really nicely. Um, what's the other one that does that? I think Cosmic Invasion can push you, and there might be, yeah, Portals overrun City with Spider People. I don't think he's a huge fan of any of those. Again, I don't think they're necessarily actively terrible for him, but especially the ones that are DMAPs combined with the ones that push him around, which happens to be a couple of them, not his favorite thing in the world. So yeah, maybe try to avoid those a little bit, but for the most part, he's not going to be super picky. So yeah, that is going to be it for Mr. Blade. This is actually looking like it's going to be the longest one of these videos that we've done, which kind of makes sense. He's an affiliation leader, so there's a lot to talk about with him. But hopefully we'll kind of be able to cut these down a little bit more going forward because I acknowledge they're a little bit long and I value you guys' time. So that said, I do appreciate your guys' time as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this little character showcase here. I don't think there's much more to talk about with Blade, so we are going to wrap up here. And yeah, let me know down below in the comments if you guys have any particularly cool tech or tactics you like with Mr. Blade here. Any specific character combos that I didn't already talk about or affiliations where you really, really like him in. I didn't really talk about him as a splash at all, but there are some really interesting ones. So if you guys have some personal favorites, please do let me know down below. Super excited to hear what you guys kind of like to do with this model. Because, yeah, I mean, with his update, I'm kind of excited to start throwing him around in a few places and see where he might stick. Um, yeah, anyways, that's going to be it for now. So have a great day, everybody. Until next time, peace.